In the lessons of Guadalupe, Ratisbon, and de Montfort, Kolbe understood that Mary is the way to holiness in Christ that he would intensely follow. She's the way, the quickest and easiest way to become a saint and to bring about massive conversions, even of the most hardened sinners. Now, Kolbe really did have his eyes set on massive conversions. In fact, he eventually described his mission as that of winning the whole world for God under the generalship of Mary Immaculate and as quickly as possible. Well, that incredibly bold mission began to become a reality through unexpected circumstances. On February 17, 1917, while Kolbe was still in Rome for his studies, the Freemasons held an obnoxious and offensive demonstration against the church in St. Peter's Square. Now, as Kolbe witnessed that disturbing scene, he thought of founding an active society to engage and conquer the kind of evil he saw in the square. And the more he thought about it, the more it appealed to him. Finally, on October 16, 1917, just 3 days after the miracle of the sun in Fatima, Kolbe gathered together 3 priests and 4 seminarians and formed the Militia Immaculata, or MI for short, a kind of spiritual army for Mary, an army he described as follows.
Strictly speaking, Militia Immaculata is our consecration to Our Lady Immaculate. According to the spirit of the Militia Immaculata, namely as one who is unconditionally and totally her instrument in life, death, and eternity.
Now the key word here is instrument. For Kolbe, the essence of the MI is to be an instrument in the hands of Mary Immaculate. It's to let oneself be used by her for God's greatest possible glory. Okay, great. But then Kolbe's teaching on the essence of the MI takes a fascinating twist. To better explain, let me say something about how Kolbe understood Mary. Now for Kolbe, the key to understanding Mary is her immaculateness, the idea that she was conceived without sin and never sinned. And from that reality, Kolbe taught that Mary does God's will perfectly. And from that, he concluded that God was able to use her as a perfect instrument. All right, but what kind of instrument? Well, for Kolbe, Mary is a powerful instrument of God's mercy. And Kolbe even goes on to say that Mary is a personification of mercy. And actually, all this about Mary and mercy makes a lot of sense when you think about it. I mean, Mary's not our judge. She's our tender mother. She's a spiritual mother who God gave us so we could experience His most tender love through a mother's heart, a sinless mother's heart. And so if Mary is a perfect instrument of God's tender mercy, it's not surprising that Kolbe says that the members of the Militia Immaculata should also be instruments of God's mercy. Kolbe put it like this: we also, through our consecration to Mary, are instruments of God's mercy in her immaculate hands, as she is an instrument of divine mercy in God's hands. So the essence of the Militia Immaculata really comes down to divine mercy. It's about being instruments, yes, but what kind of instruments? For Kolbe, it's about being instruments of divine mercy in Mary's hands, as she is an instrument of divine mercy in God's hands. Now, understandably, there may be some who will struggle with Kolbe's portrayal of Mary as a kind of figure of pure mercy, while God may seem to be the mean guy holding the justice bag. But don't blame Kolbe. He's not the one who portrays God as the mean guy. Rather, the fault lies with the devil and our own wound from original sin. It's like this. Think back again to God's school of trust, which we talked about throughout this series. Again, that school is God's effort to heal the wound caused by original sin, the wound that the Catechism describes as a distorted image of God that causes us to distrust Him. Well, part of God's brilliant plan for His school of trust was to choose someone very special to help heal the wound in our hearts, the wound of our false image of Him. Now, fittingly, He chose a woman for that mission. Okay, so why is that fitting? Well, for one, it's because a woman, Eve, she caused the wound in the first place. So God created the new Eve, Mary, to help heal the wound so we could draw near to the new Adam, who is Christ. Second, He chose a woman, Mary, to help heal the wound in our hearts because, there's just something about women, specifically mothers, that wins over our hearts. I mean, there's something about motherhood in particular that draws us all in. All right, but now someone might say, wait a minute, all we need is Jesus. He's love and mercy itself. We don't need Mary to heal our wound. Well, while it's true that Jesus is love and mercy itself, He's also still God. And the distorted image we all tend to have essentially has to do with God and not with creatures. So in God's school of trust, Mary is a kind of secret weapon. And by that I mean that she can get into hearts in a way that even Jesus Himself can't. Now you say, what? Well, it's like this. As we learned in the first episode, God can't force us to trust Him and love Him. And if people decide to reject Him and won't listen to Him, then His hands are tied. I mean, if because of the wound of original sin, or because of our personal sins, or because of the sins of others, we don't trust God, then God needs to find another way to win our trust. Well, actually, He doesn't need to, because He loves us and He wants to. And so He uses Mary as His secret weapon. And she works. She gets into people's hardened hearts. Why? Well, for one, because she's not God. So the God wound doesn't apply to her. Also, she wins over our hearts because she's this beautiful woman and tender mother who, again, as Colby pointed out, is a personification of mercy. All right, so then what does Mary do when she enters into hardened hearts? What does she do when people let her approach? Well, it's pretty simple. She leads them to Jesus. She teaches them about Jesus' mercy. And then she brings us to His pure side, which is the fountain of mercy. This is the testimony of the saints and the experience of countless Christians. So Mary is a special secret weapon for God as He tries to bring people into His school of trust, especially those who run away from Him. Put differently, Mary is an instrument of mercy, leading us to the source of divine mercy, who is Jesus. Now, she herself is certainly not the source, but rather she leads us to the source. And guess what? We too are called to be God's secret weapons. We too are called to be instruments of God's mercy, leading people to the source of mercy, especially those who have turned away from God. But Colby's whole point for members of the Militia Immaculata is that Mary is the best instrument of God's mercy, leading people to the source of mercy. And so we too will be the best possible instruments of mercy when we allow ourselves to become instruments in her tender and merciful hands.